Hello, my friends. Unfortunately, in the last few days, we have seen significant Russian advances and even the loss of some settlements. However, it's important to note that these advances come at a tremendous cost for them. A Russian officer has decided to reveal the truth about Russia's losses.
Офицеры пришли, офицеров хватает. В моей бригаде на 200% получается, 200% личного состава еще числится в штате. Ну и бригада у меня до хера людей потеряла, около 12 тысяч. Официально 6 тысяч, а так 12 тысяч. Потому что там командир бригады бросает ДШБ и танки с трубой.
As we can see, all the advances come with massive casualties. Despite the difficult situation on the front, the war is also impacting Russian territory due to ongoing shelling. It's reported that almost all border regions have experienced rolling power outages, and Governor Gladkov is urging everyone to leave their settlements and move as far away as possible.
Пожалуйста, я сейчас обращаюсь к жителям приграничных обстреливаемых территорий. Дорогие друзья, нужно, конечно, переезжать, потому что ситуация продолжает оставаться напряженным. Главная ценность у любого человека – это жизнь. Поэтому нужно обращаться в сельские администрации, в администрации районов, городов, правительства Белгородской области. Мы быстро будем принимать решения по временному отселению в безопасные места.
In summary, the situation has escalated to the point where a buffer zone is now being created on Russian territory. However, this is the situation as of today. After the US elections, things could change drastically. The US vice presidential candidate is being advised to impose personal sanctions on 6 Ukrainian deputies. As known, Donald Trump announced his vice presidential candidate on July 15th, choosing J.D. Vance. Vance has harshly criticized Bill 8371 regarding the activities of religious organizations in Ukraine. He says politicians need to understand that this will be President Trump's position if he wins the November elections. Given that Republicans are highly sensitive about religious freedom, unlike Democrats, the consequences could be significant. Political analyst Andrei Zolotaryov states that sanctions are really a real possibility if Trump wins the election. Following the assassination attempt on him, this is likely almost a foregone conclusion. Trump is not Biden, he will impose sanctions without hesitation, the expert adds. In general, we are in for very interesting times. Meanwhile, on the front, territorial losses continue, with the Ukrainian armed forces report that the Russians are once again attempting to breach the border in the Sumy region. Yesterday, in the Sumy region, the Russians tried to break through. The direction was the village of Chuykivka, the village of Roshkovichi, and the village of Sydne. After prolonged artillery preparation and mortar shelling, a sabotage and reconnaissance group entered. Many of our soldiers were wounded, but the Russians were repelled. People in Druzhba are now without communication, electricity, or internet. As we can see, the Russians are trying to expand the front as much as possible, making the situation very challenging. Now, let's turn to the situation on the front line, starting with the Pokrovsk direction. Just yesterday, the Ukrainian armed forces reported that they had to leave the village of Lozovatske. Though there hasn't been any official confirmation yet, today the Ukrainian armed forces continue to report Russian advances in Novoselivka Persha. The situation is difficult and worsening by the hour. The Russians have managed to occupy the northwest part of the village, leaving only a portion of the southern area under control. They are pushing from the north and squeezing from the east, posing a serious threat. The Russians also continue to break through in the areas of Воздвиженка, then Novoalexandrivka, Kalynove, the village of Progress, and Umanske. Additionally, the number of shelling remains at a maximum, and yesterday 5 people were injured as a result of strikes on Pokrovsk. In the Toretsk direction, the situation is also challenging. The Russians are continuing to advance both in New York and towards encircling Toretsk. Moreover, the fighting in Pivnichne hasn't ceased. Over the past day, they conducted 23 assaults, but the front line hasn't changed yet. In the Chasiv Yar direction, the Russians continue their attacks with 5 assaults over the past day. They are still trying to advance within the city and are also assaulting the outskirts of Klishchiivka. So far, there have been no changes in the front line, but the Russians continue their efforts to capture Chasiv Yar and move further towards Kostiantynivka. In the Siversk direction, the situation has worsened following yesterday's Russian advances near Vyimka, Verkhnyokamensky, and capture of Rozdolivka. The Russians have now reached new positions and have begun assaulting additional Ukrainian positions. They are now very close to Fedorivka and have even reached the outskirts of Pereizne. Battles are now being fought for these 2 villages. Here, the Russians are trying to do everything possible to encircle Siversk, and looking ahead, their plan is to advance towards Slovyansk and Kramatorsk. In the Crimea direction, the Russians aim to advance towards Liman and from there to Slavyansk, as they had planned before the Ukrainian forces' counteroffensive. However, they never managed to reach Slavyansk. Today, the Russians are attempting to push the Ukrainian forces back across the river, but they are unsuccessful. The front line remains unchanged. In the Svatov area, the Russians are trying to assault Berestove and Andriivka. However, near Stelmachivka, there is still a lull. The Ukrainian forces had seriously damaged all Russian groups there, prompting the Russians to try to break through in other villages. But they haven't achieved any success and continue to hold their defense. South of this area, battles are ongoing in the fields near Hrekivka, and the Russians are attempting to break through to the village of Makiyivka. However, there are no changes along the front line. In the Kupetsk direction, the Russians are maintaining their activity. They are assaulting Sinkivka, then Stepova Novoselivka and Pishane. Reports indicate about 10 assaults, but the Ukrainian forces are managing to repel all attacks and the front line remains unchanged. In the Kharkiv direction, the Russians continue to assault Gliboke, and the Ukrainian forces report that the Russians have had minor successes. On the northeastern flank, the enemy has pushed us back slightly, but it's not critical. Our troops are pushing back hard in response. We have also made some progress to the north to cut off the enemy's supply lines. In Vovchansk, the fighting continues unabated. Here, the Russians are intensively shelling the entire area in an attempt to turn the tide in their favor and for the Ukrainian forces to retreat. In the Kurakhve direction, the Russians continue to advance in the northern part of Krasnohorivka. They are moving forward street by street, and the situation there is critical. The Ukrainian forces are doing everything possible to prevent the Russians from advancing, but it's extremely difficult under constant challenge. This situation is also challenging near Georgievka, where the Russians are assaulting the settlement with high offensive activity. Reports indicate 15 assaults in the entire direction over the past day. And the battles for Paraskoviivka and the village of Kostiantinivka are also ongoing. While there are no changes in the front line yet, if this continues, changes are likely soon. In the Vuhledar direction, after successfully capturing Urozhaine and Staromayorske, the Russians immediately began assaulting Makarivka. For now, the Ukrainian armed forces managed to hold the defense, but the situation is challenging. Meanwhile, the Russians continue their attacks on Vadiane, but here, as before, there are no changes. In the Zaporizhia direction, the Russians are trying to advance on Hulai Pole and continue their attacks on Malatokmachka and Novoandriivka. The Russians are pushing further from the front line, attempting to secure new positions. However, the Ukrainian forces are destroying all their groups and the front line remains unchanged. What's going on? In the direction of Kherson, the Russians continue to press forward, aiming to finally push the Ukrainian forces of the left bank. They are storming positions near Kozachi Lahiri and continue shelling the right bank, though there have been no changes reported over the past day. Meanwhile, Russians are concerned that with Trump's administration returning, support for Ukraine may remain unchanged.
Вы помните при всем при этом, что именно администрация Трампа ежедневно выходила на брифинги и с умным видом заявляла о безальтернативности Минских соглашений. И говорили, да, переговоры, да, нужно находить консенсус, в то же время выстраивая против России украинский проект. И я не исключаю, что и в этот раз будет опять Трамп будет про поговорить, а управлять украинским проектом останутся все те же люди и силы, что и сейчас. Ничего не поменяется. Почему один из первых там, как вы говорите, Дженцанюк примчался как бы решать? Это один из тех, кто управляет украинским проектом, причем серьезно, даже находясь без должности. Это один из бенефициаров украинского проекта, один из вдохновителей украинского проекта. Поэтому в этой части вот нужно крайне осторожно смотреть на публичную риторику и крайне внимательно смотреть на практическую часть. А вот эта практическая часть говорит мне о том, что пока никаких серьезных намерений в части переговорного процесса нет.
What do you think about this? Please write your thoughts in the comments. And that's all from me. So please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all the latest news. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.